Have you ever been betrayed by someone you loved with all your heart? What do you do when the person you trusted the most shatters your world? This is the story of Lillian, a woman who faced the darkest betrayal but found the strength to rise, rebuild, and inspire millions. Her journey will remind you of the power within you to overcome any obstacle and reclaim your life. Stay with us until the end, because this story is not just about her. It's about you and the strength you carry inside. Welcome to the Alcott Stories family. Whether you're new here or have been with us from the start, your opinion means the world to me. I want to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below, share your own experiences, and let's continue this conversation together. And if you haven't yet, don't forget to subscribe to the Alcott Stories channel so you never miss a powerful story. Thank you for being part of our community. Lillian's life was the culmination of a fierce, unrelenting pursuit of her dreams. As a Black woman navigating a male-dominated business world, her path had been anything but easy. She had fought against stereotypes, doubters, and systemic barriers that sought to undermine her success. Every step she took had been a battle, but Lillian had always been driven by an unshakable belief in herself. She wasn't just building a company, she was carving a place for herself in a world that didn't always seem to have space for people like her. Despite the struggles, she had emerged victorious. Her business had blossomed into a multi-million-dollar empire with investments in several industries: tech, fashion, and real estate. She had achieved financial independence and with it a sense of freedom. It wasn't just about the money, it was about proving to herself that she could achieve anything. It was about having the power to shape her own destiny. But as successful as she was in her professional life, there was another side of her, one that craved love and companionship. Lillian had always dreamed of finding someone who could understand her, someone who would stand by her side as an equal. And when James entered her life, it felt as though that dream had come true. He was everything she had ever hoped for in a partner. Tall, handsome, with dark, penetrating eyes that seemed to read her soul, James had a quiet intensity about him that drew Lillian in. He had an effortless charm, a quick wit that made her laugh even on the toughest days. His words were always thoughtful, his gestures kind, and his smile infectious. Lillian found herself thinking that after all the struggles, she had finally found someone who could match her ambition, her drive, and her passion for life. When they met, it had been at a gala for women entrepreneurs. Lillian was immediately struck by James's confidence, how he stood apart from the crowd, calm, collected, and exuding warmth. He wasn't flashy or overbearing. Instead, there was an aura of quiet strength about him. They struck up a conversation that night, and soon their connection deepened into something more. James would often tell her how proud he was of her accomplishments, how deeply he admired her for overcoming the odds. He painted a picture of a future they could build together filled with adventure, luxury, and success. To Lillian, it was a dream come true. Here was a man who wasn't intimidated by her success, but who seemed to embrace it. She saw in him a partner who would support her not because of her wealth, but because of her character and the person she was. Their life together seemed to be a fairy tale. They moved into a sprawling penthouse, a symbol of their success. The city skyline outside their window became a constant reminder of everything they had built. Lillian was thrilled to share her success with James. She loved him with all her heart, believing they were truly equals, partners in every sense of the word. They spent weekends in tropical resorts, attending charity galas, and enjoying the company of friends who envied their perfect life. James was always there by her side, holding her hand in public, making her laugh when the pressures of her business life became too much, and supporting her when she needed it the most. He was the person Lillian trusted implicitly. She shared her dreams with him, her fears, and her deepest desires. It was easy to believe that their love was the real deal, the kind that would stand the test of time. But as the days went by, there were moments of unease that Lillian brushed off as simple insecurities. Occasionally, she noticed a fleeting look of distraction in James's eyes or a slight hesitation when she spoke about their future. But each time, she chose to overlook it, convinced that their love was something rare, something unbreakable. What Lillian didn't know, however, was that James had his own motives for being with her. Beneath his charming exterior, there was a cold calculation that Lillian had failed to see. James wasn't truly in love with her, at least not in the way she loved him. He admired her, yes, but what he truly admired was her wealth, her influence, and the opportunities they afforded him. To James, Lillian was a stepping stone to the life he had always wanted, but had never been able to achieve on his own. From the beginning, he had seen her not as a partner, but as an opportunity. He had grown up with nothing, watching others around him live lives of comfort and privilege. But his own beginnings were humble, and he had always felt like an outsider in a world of luxury. When he met Lillian, he saw the perfect solution to his desires. Here was a woman who had everything he had ever wanted, and all he had to do was charm her, flatter her, and pretend to be the man she believed him to be. It wasn't about her intelligence, her drive, or her spirit. It was about what she could provide for him, a life of luxury, status, and ease. The life he had always dreamed of. To him, the love they shared was a performance, one he was willing to play for as long as it served his purposes. And for now, Lillian's success was just the ticket he needed to escape the life he had always known. James's affections for Lillian were shallow, rooted in the material comforts her wealth could bring him. But he was careful to hide his true intentions. He knew how to play the role of the loving husband, always attentive, always complimentary, always supportive. Lillian's heart was open, and she believed every word he said. As Lillian stood at the window of their penthouse looking out over the shimmering lights of the city below, she felt a sense of contentment. This life, the life she had fought for, felt complete. She had the success, the love, and the partner who would stand beside her through it all. Little did she know that the very foundation of her happiness was built on a lie. The man she had given her heart to was not the person he appeared to be. Behind the warmth of James's smile, a darker truth was beginning to unravel, and Lillian's world, her dream life, was about to come crashing down. The man she trusted, the man she loved, had a secret, and the consequences of that secret would change everything. James was a man of many faces, and none of them truly revealed who he was. He had learned the art of deception at a young age. Growing up in a modest household, he had always felt like he was on the outside looking in, watching others lead lives of privilege and luxury. The desire for wealth, comfort, and status consumed him, but so did the need to keep up appearances, to project an image of someone who had everything under control. Lillian had become the perfect symbol of that image. She was everything James thought he wanted: strong, accomplished, beautiful, and successful. She represented the life he had always dreamed of, but never thought he could have. But the truth was, James's affection for Lillian wasn't rooted in love. It was a calculated move, a means to an end. While he admired her intellect, her entrepreneurial prowess, and the way she held her own in a world dominated by powerful men, it wasn't her spirit that James loved. It was her wealth, her accomplishments, her ability to provide him with everything he had ever wanted. In truth, Lillian had become nothing more than a ticket to the kind of life James had always fantasized about, one where he no longer had to struggle, no longer had to work for everything he wanted. But there was someone else in James's life, someone he didn't talk about, someone he thought about when he lay awake at night. Kara. Kara was everything Lillian wasn't. She was the type of woman who effortlessly glided through life. Pale skin, flowing blonde hair, and a lightness about her that seemed to command the attention of every room she entered. Kara was beautiful in a way that Lillian wasn't, at least, not in James's eyes. She wasn't a powerful CEO burdened with the weight of running an empire. No, Kara had no such responsibilities. She worked as a secretary in James's office, answering phones and making copies, living a life of simplicity compared to the high-powered, high-stakes world Lillian inhabited. It started as a harmless flirtation. James would catch Kara's eyes across the office, and she'd smile at him in that way that made him feel special, wanted. Kara had this ability to make everything seem effortless. She didn't have to work hard to achieve success. Her beauty and charm gave her an advantage that James envied. At first, James told himself it was just a passing infatuation. After all, he had a wife, a successful, beautiful wife. But as the weeks went by, the attraction grew into something more. James began to fantasize about a life with Kara, a life without the pressures of business meetings, financial decisions, and constantly trying to prove himself. With Kara, life would be simpler. She didn't demand the same sacrifices Lillian did. She didn't expect him to be a partner in building an empire. She just wanted him to be present, to give her attention, and to enjoy the luxury that Lillian's success provided. Kara's world was a dream, a world James longed to escape to, far from the burdens he faced in his marriage. Kara represented the carefree existence James had always craved, and the more he spent time with her, the more he began to crave it. He began to imagine a future where he didn't have to work as hard, didn't have to struggle to prove himself worthy of Lillian's love. Kara became an escape, a way to live the life he'd always wanted without having to earn it. But reality intruded when Lillian's strength and determination came into play. Lillian wasn't just a passive partner. She was someone who demanded respect, loyalty, and honesty. She wasn't interested in being with someone who would take her success for granted or who wasn't committed to their shared future. She wanted a real partnership, a true connection. And so, James played the game. He learned to be the husband Lillian believed he was. He showered her with compliments, made her feel loved and adored, and worked tirelessly to ensure that she believed in their future together. He wasn't just after her money. He was after the stability that her success brought him. He needed her to believe in their relationship, to continue trusting him as her partner, her equal. But deep down, he knew that as long as he had Lillian, he would continue to get everything he wanted, without ever truly having to give anything of himself in return. The first time he transferred money to Kara, it was justified as a small gift, a dinner to celebrate a recent success at work. Kara had asked him for something simple, a treat to celebrate her new promotion. It seemed harmless enough, and after all, he reasoned, it was just a small expense. But the more he gave, the more Kara wanted. And the more he gave, the more he began to believe he could sustain this double life. James found himself spending Lillian's money on Kara with increasing frequency. Designer handbags, expensive jewelry, and even trips to luxury resorts, all charged to Lillian's credit cards. The guilt was there, of course, but James was skilled at rationalizing his actions. Lillian had everything, and Kara, well, she deserved a taste of that life too. After all, she was a part of his world now, and James convinced himself that he could afford it. His success, his wife's wealth, his secret indulgences. He didn't see the harm in providing Kara with what he believed she deserved. But as the months wore on, the lies began to pile up, and the cracks in James's facade became impossible to ignore. Lillian had always trusted him implicitly. She had never suspected that he was capable of deception. But the more he lied, the more strained their relationship became. Lillian started to question James's actions, his late nights at the office, his mysterious phone calls, and his secretive behavior. She was no fool. There were times when she could feel the distance between them, when the warmth they once shared felt more like an illusion than a reality. But every time Lillian asked about his increasing expenditures or the odd behavior, James was quick with an answer: a business expense, a meeting he'd had to attend, a new investment. He had become a master at deflecting her concerns, spinning stories that kept her at ease. Lillian's trust in him remained unshaken, at least for now. She didn't realize that while she was giving him everything, he was quietly pulling away from her, building a separate world with Kara, one where he didn't have to be the man Lillian needed him to be. As James's web of lies grew more tangled, so too did the pressure on his relationship with Lillian. The more he lied, the harder it became to maintain the illusion of a perfect marriage. The life he had built with Lillian, the success, the wealth, the admiration, was no longer enough. What he wanted now was the freedom to live without responsibility, without the weight of having to live up to Lillian's expectations. The lie had become his truth, and the strain on his marriage was only a matter of time before it came crashing down. But for now, James was in control. He had the money, the luxury, and the woman who would give him everything he wanted. All he had to do was keep the game going, play the part of the devoted husband, the charming partner, and continue to hide the truth from Lillian. What James didn't realize, though, was that the web of lies he had woven would not remain hidden forever. The cracks were already beginning to show, and the truth was about to come to light in a way that would change everything. For years, Lillian had believed that the love she shared with James was unbreakable. They had built a life together, one rooted in trust, loyalty, and mutual admiration. She had no reason to doubt him, no reason to question the foundation of their marriage. To Lillian, James was her rock, her partner, the person who would stand by her no matter what. She had always been fiercely independent, but in James, she had found someone she could rely on, someone who seemed as invested in their future as she was. But as the months passed, small cracks began to appear, cracks that Lillian could not ignore, even though she desperately tried to dismiss them. It started with the little things, subtle changes in James's behavior that seemed harmless at first. He had always been open with her, transparent in every way. She knew his phone password, knew where his meetings were, and had never once felt the need to question his whereabouts or actions. But suddenly things began to shift. It started with his phone. James, who had once been carefree and open about everything, now became oddly protective of it. He would carry his phone around with him at all times, making sure it was never out of his sight. Lillian, who had always trusted him implicitly, never thought twice about it. But then one evening, she walked into their living room and caught him quickly locking his phone as she approached. His eyes darted nervously toward her, and for a split second she saw something in his face, something that wasn't quite right. Lillian paused, a sense of unease creeping into her chest. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice tentative. James offered her a nervous laugh, brushing it off as nothing. "Just finishing a message for work," he said, his voice a little too casual, his tone a little too light. "You know how it is." But something in the way he said it didn't sit right with Lillian. She had never once questioned James's openness before. This sudden secrecy, this defensiveness, it felt foreign to her. She pushed the thought aside, though. After all, she trusted him, right? Surely this was just a small thing, a fleeting moment of odd behavior. Yet the changes continued. James, who had once been so attentive, began to pull away. He was still affectionate at times, but the warmth in his gestures, the spark in his eyes seemed to dim. His once constant presence in their home had become intermittent. Lillian noticed the late nights that had once been reserved for quiet dinners, talks about their dreams and shared laughter. Now James seemed to have an endless string of late meetings at the office. When he came home, his face was tired, his energy drained, as if he had been somewhere else, doing something else that had taken all of his attention. At first, Lillian tried to convince herself that it was just the demands of work. She understood the pressures that came with running a business, and she didn't want to be the kind of partner who accused James of neglect for no reason. But the late nights became more frequent, and the excuses more routine. A late meeting, a corporate deal that ran over, or I had to handle something with the team. Each excuse was more vague than the last, and with each one, Lillian felt her heart sink just a little bit more. It wasn't just the late nights. There were other things, small details that stuck out like thorns in her side. The way James would pull away when she tried to hold his hand during dinner, the way he would suddenly get absorbed in his phone or the television when she wanted to talk. These weren't just ordinary signs of stress. They were signs of distance. James was retreating from her, and Lillian could feel it in her bones. Then, one day, everything changed. Lillian had returned early from a business trip, catching James off guard. She had planned to surprise him, to come home and unwind together, but when she stepped through the door of their penthouse, she heard the sound of James's voice. He was on the phone. She froze for a moment, unsure whether to interrupt. But as she stood there, she heard something that made her blood run cold, a name she didn't recognize. Kara. Her mind raced as she listened to James's voice, light and flirtatious, as he laughed in a way that sounded different, more genuine, more relaxed than she had heard in a long time. "You know, I was thinking we should take a weekend trip. I could get us both away from this crazy work life," James was saying. "I've got some ideas. How about we look into a place this weekend?" Lillian's stomach churned as the name hit her like a punch to the gut. Kara. Who was she? And why was James speaking to her with such intimacy? Her heart beat faster, and her pulse quickened as she struggled to process what she had just overheard. The realization began to settle in, a cold, painful certainty that something was wrong. She stood there for what felt like an eternity, paralyzed by the weight of her thoughts. Should she confront him now, or wait until he finished his call? She didn't want to jump to conclusions, but the evidence was piling up. She had heard enough. When James finally ended the call and turned to see her standing in the doorway, his face immediately flushed with guilt. He quickly masked it with a smile, but the damage had already been done. Lillian didn't need to ask for confirmation. She knew. She could see it in his eyes. "Who is Kara?" Lillian asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The words hung in the air, sharp and painful. James's smile faltered and he shifted uncomfortably. "Kara? She's just someone I work with," he said quickly, his voice too smooth. "She's a secretary at the office. We were just talking about work stuff. Nothing to worry about." Lillian's heart was pounding in her chest. She knew better than to accept his words at face value. She had been a successful businesswoman for years, and she had learned how to read people, how to see the truth behind their lies. But James was good. He was so good at hiding the truth, at wearing that charming smile and making everything seem like it was normal. His words flowed easily, like a river of reassurance, trying to convince her that she was just being paranoid. "You're just being paranoid," he said with a soft laugh, trying to ease her anxiety. "I would never betray you, Lillian. You know that." Lillian wanted to believe him. She truly did. She wanted to believe that the man she loved, the man she had trusted with everything, was innocent. But the truth was beginning to take shape, no matter how much she tried to ignore it. Her gut was telling her something she didn't want to hear, that James had been hiding something from her all along. Tears welled in her eyes, but she held them back, refusing to let him see her weakness. She had always prided herself on her strength, on her ability to face challenges head-on. But this was different. This was the one challenge she had never expected to face. Betrayal. "I want the truth, James," she said, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside her. "I deserve to know the truth." In that moment, she knew that her world would never be the same. The man she had given everything to, the man she had trusted with her heart, her empire, her dreams, was slipping away, and she had no idea how to stop it. Lillian sat alone in the dimly lit study, the weight of the world bearing down on her shoulders. The soft hum of the city outside her penthouse window did little to drown out the noise in her mind. For years, she had believed in her marriage, in the love that she had shared with James. She had given him everything, her trust, her heart, her empire. But now, as she sat hunched over the pile of financial statements and bank records, it all felt like a cruel joke. Her fingers hovered over the screen of her laptop, eyes scanning the numbers in front of her. She had been going over their joint accounts, something she had done hundreds of times before, but this time, Something felt off. At first, it was just a whisper of doubt, a feeling that there was something hidden beneath the surface. But as she dug deeper, that whisper turned into a roar. Large sums of money, hundreds of thousands of dollars, had been transferred to an unknown account. The names didn't match any of their usual business contacts or friends. Lillian's heart raced as she clicked on the transaction details. The amounts, the dates, everything about these transfers felt wrong. But then, as if the universe had chosen this moment to reveal the painful truth, she saw it. The transfers matched the exact amounts James had been spending on extravagant gifts, luxury handbags, jewelry, trips to exclusive resorts. The realization hit her like a tidal wave. Her stomach twisted, her breath caught in her throat, and her vision blurred as the world around her seemed to fade away. She had known deep down that something wasn't right. But seeing the numbers in front of her, seeing the cold, hard evidence, there was no denying it now. James had been using her, not just for her wealth, but for the life of luxury he had always dreamed of. Lillian's hands trembled as she closed the laptop. She sat back in her chair, her mind swirling with disbelief and anguish. How could he have done this to her? How could the man she had loved, the man she had trusted with everything, betray her so completely? She had worked so hard to get where she was. Every success, every triumph, every dollar in her bank account had been earned through blood, sweat, and tears. And yet, James had seen her as nothing more than a stepping stone to the life he desired. She wasn't his partner. She was a means to an end. Her heart ached, each beat a painful reminder of how deeply she had been deceived. The love she had given so freely had been taken for granted. But as the pain washed over her, another emotion began to rise. Anger. She was angry at herself for not seeing the signs earlier. Angry at him for betraying her, for stealing from her not just her money, but her trust, her belief in love. Most of all, she was angry that she had let herself fall into this trap, believing that he had been her equal when in reality, he had been playing a dangerous game of manipulation. The next day, Lillian made a decision that would change everything. She wouldn't wallow in self-pity or let her heartbreak define her. She would take control of the situation. She hired a private investigator, someone she could trust to uncover the truth, to reveal the full extent of James's lies. The investigator worked quickly, combing through James's private life, piecing together the puzzle Lillian had struggled to understand. The report came a few days later, and with trembling hands, Lillian opened it. Every word stung like a blade. James hadn't just been spending money on Kara. No, this was far worse. He had been having an affair with her for nearly a year. Secret meetings, hidden calls, covert messages, all of it meticulously detailed in the investigator's report. Each line of the report was a dagger to her heart. The betrayal was deeper than she had ever imagined. It wasn't just about the money, the gifts, or the lies he had told her. It was the truth that he had been emotionally and physically involved with someone else for months, while pretending to be the loving husband she had believed him to be. She wasn't just heartbroken. She was humiliated, exposed, and left with nothing but the remnants of a life she had spent years building with a man who had never truly cared for her. But amid the overwhelming sorrow, something changed inside Lillian. The tears that had once flowed freely now began to dry, replaced by a cold, fierce resolve. She would not allow this man to destroy her. She had built an empire from the ground up. She had faced down every challenge, every obstacle in her path, and come out stronger on the other side. This betrayal was no different. James had underestimated her, thinking that her love for him would make her weak. He had believed that her devotion would keep her blinded to the truth. But Lillian was no fool. She had been deceived, yes, but she was also a woman of strength, a woman of vision, a woman who could rise from the ashes. In the weeks that followed, Lillian began to take back control of her life. She moved swiftly, methodically. She consulted with her legal team, ensuring that her assets were protected and that James would have no claim to her business or her wealth. But more than that, she began to heal. She surrounded herself with friends, with people who loved and supported her. And slowly but surely, she began to rebuild her confidence. Lillian knew that her path forward wouldn't be easy. There would be days when the pain of betrayal would threaten to consume her, days when she would doubt her worth and wonder how she had let it all happen. But those days would be fewer and farther between. With every step she took away from James, with every piece of her life that she reclaimed, she felt stronger. James may have broken her heart, but he could never break her spirit. And that was something he would never understand. Lillian sat in the quiet of their shared living room, her back straight and her gaze focused on the door. The space that had once been filled with laughter, warmth, and the quiet comfort of two people who were supposed to be partners now felt like a battleground. It was here in this room, under the soft glow of the chandelier that had once witnessed their happiest moments, that she would finally confront James. She had been planning it in her mind for days, her heart hardened by the cold reality she had uncovered. She had to be strong. She had to let go of the love she thought was real. Her breath was steady, but inside, her emotions were a whirlwind. As she waited for James to arrive, she couldn't help but reflect on all that had led up to this moment. The countless late nights, the unanswered questions, the nagging feeling in her gut that something wasn't right. All of those doubts were now confirmed. She knew everything, every lie, every betrayal. And this confrontation, was the last step in reclaiming her life. When James finally walked into the room, his face was a mixture of confusion and unease. He had no idea that Lillian knew the full extent of his deceit. He had been hoping that somehow he could smooth things over, convince her that everything was just a misunderstanding. But the moment their eyes met, Lillian saw the flicker of guilt in his eyes. It was subtle, but it was there. Lillian didn't give him the chance to speak first. She had made her decision, and there was no turning back. Her voice was calm, almost eerily so, but there was a fire in her eyes that James hadn't seen before. It was a fire born from betrayal. But more than that, it was a fire born from self-respect and an unwavering belief in her own worth. "I know everything, James," she said, her voice steady and full of authority. Her words landed like a heavy blow, and James's face drained of color. For a moment he froze, as if the weight of the truth had just hit him. He took a step forward, trying to gather his composure, but Lillian could see the cracks in his facade. "Lillian, please," he stammered, his voice trembling with desperation. "You've misunderstood. I love you. You have to believe me." He tried to reach for her hand, but Lillian pulled away, as if his touch was foreign to her now. He had no claim over her heart any longer. The look on his face was a mix of confusion and fear, a man realizing that his lies were unraveling in front of him. But Lillian stood firm, unflinching. The pain she had felt in the past weeks no longer had the power to control her. Her heart had been broken, yes, but it was no longer fragile. It had healed in the fire of her own strength, and now it was unbreakable. "You never loved me, James," she said, her voice tinged with a deep sorrow. But it was a sorrow for what could have been, not for what was. "You loved my wealth, my success, and the life you could have because of me." She took a deep breath, letting her words hang in the air. This was it, the truth, no matter how painful. "I trusted you. I gave you everything, and you betrayed me." Each word was like a weight being lifted from her shoulders. It was as if, in finally speaking the truth, she was reclaiming her power, taking back control of her life. The sadness that had once overwhelmed her was now replaced by clarity. The tears she had shed in silence, the nights spent in disbelief, had all been necessary steps in this journey of self-discovery. And now, she was ready to move on. James, however, was desperate. His pleas grew more frantic as he tried to reason with her. "Lillian, this is crazy. We've been through so much together. You can't just throw it all away. I swear I'll change. I'll make it right." His voice broke, a final attempt to salvage whatever shred of dignity he had left. But Lillian could see through the charade. There were no more words left to be spoken, no more apologies that would make a difference. The man who had once promised to cherish her had shown her nothing but deceit. There was nothing left to save. "I don't want your apologies, James," she replied coldly, her eyes never leaving his. "I want you to leave. Take whatever's left of your dignity and walk away. This is over. You're no longer a part of my life." For a brief moment, James stood there, stunned, his mouth opening and closing as if searching for a way to undo the damage he had caused. But Lillian's words were final. He had no place in her future. No amount of pleading would change that. The next hours passed in a blur of paperwork and cold, emotionless decisions. Lillian didn't allow herself to wallow. She had been through enough already. The betrayal hurt, yes, but she knew that she couldn't let it define her. She wouldn't let James, nor anyone, take away her sense of self-worth. She had worked too hard to get to where she was, and no one, not even someone who had once promised to love her, could tear her down. The following day, Lillian made the decision to file for divorce. It wasn't about revenge. It was about securing her future, about ensuring that James wouldn't take a single penny of what she had built. She had worked tirelessly to build her business, her reputation, and her wealth. She wasn't about to let someone who had never truly cared about her walk away with what was rightfully hers. In the days that followed, Lillian felt an overwhelming sense of peace. It wasn't easy, but she knew she had made the right choice. She surrounded herself with people who truly cared about her, who supported her not because of what she had, but because of who she was. Her friends, her colleagues, and her family. Those were the people who mattered now. And as she moved forward, she knew that her story wasn't over. Lillian had faced the deepest pain a person could experience, but instead of succumbing to it, she had used it as fuel to rise above. She had become stronger, wiser, and more resolute than ever before. And in the process, she had learned something invaluable. No one, no matter how much they may promise you the world, has the power to define your worth. Only you can do that. And with that knowledge, Lillian stepped into a new chapter of her life. One where she was no longer defined by the man who had betrayed her, but by the woman she had always been. Strong, independent, and capable of achieving anything. The day had come, the day when Lillian could no longer keep the truth to herself. After everything she had uncovered, his lies, his betrayal, she had to face him one last time. The living room, a space that had once been filled with laughter, shared dreams, and whispered promises, now felt cold and foreign. The pristine furniture, the gleaming chandelier, the plush carpets, everything in that room seemed to mock her, a cruel reminder of the love that had been a facade. Lillian sat on the edge of the couch, her posture straight and unwavering. Her hands rested on her lap, fingers clenched, but not in fear. She was calm, composed, but within her burned an intensity that would not be ignored. This was the moment where everything would change. As James entered the room, Lillian didn't stand. There was no dramatic confrontation, no flurry of words. She simply looked at him with piercing eyes that seemed to see straight through him. His expression shifted from the usual charm to one of concern, his brows knitting together as he took in the unusual coldness in her gaze. He had always been able to charm his way out of trouble, to talk his way out of sticky situations, but not this time. "I know everything," Lillian said calmly. her voice steady and full of quiet authority. It was as if the weight of the world had been lifted from her shoulders with those words. She had faced her truth, and now she would face him without fear. James froze. His face drained of color. For a brief moment he looked as if the ground beneath him had just opened up, swallowing him whole. His mouth opened, but no words came out. In that brief silence, Lillian saw the panic in his eyes, the realization that his lies had been exposed. But just as quickly as the fear flashed, his mask of charm returned. "Lillian, please, you've misunderstood," he said, his voice a little too high-pitched, a little too desperate. He took a step toward her, his hands outstretched as if to comfort her, but Lillian remained unmoved. "I love you," he added, though the words now felt hollow, empty. His face, once so familiar and comforting, now seemed like the face of a stranger. Lillian looked at him without flinching. "You never loved me, James. You loved my wealth, my success, and the life you could have because of me," she said, each word deliberate and heavy. Her voice didn't rise, but it carried with it a weight that made the air in the room feel thick. "You saw me as a ticket to the life you wanted, and I gave you everything. My trust, my heart. And this is how you repay me?" James stepped back, his face a mask of confusion. "Lillian, please," he repeated, his voice now pleading. "We can work through this. I'm sorry. I was just confused. I didn't mean to hurt you." But Lillian had heard enough. The words that had once charmed her, that had once made her believe in his sincerity, now rang false. Every apology, every excuse, every tear he shed felt like a cheap act. She saw through him now, his desperation, his attempts to maintain control. The man who had promised to be by her side through thick and thin had shown his true colors. He was nothing more than a man driven by his own insecurities, using her to fulfill his desires. "I trusted you, James," she said, her voice low but unwavering. "I gave you everything, my heart, my time, my loyalty, and you took it all for granted. You betrayed me in the worst way possible." James tried again, stepping forward once more. "We can fix this. I'll do whatever it takes to make things right," he said, his eyes pleading. But Lillian stood up, her figure tall and resolute. "No, James. You don't get to make this right. Not anymore. I don't need your promises or your apologies. I need you to leave. Take whatever's left of your dignity and walk out the door. This is over." For a moment, James didn't move. He looked at her as if expecting her to change her mind, to soften, to give in. But Lillian remained firm. There was no turning back. The woman who had once been vulnerable and in love was now gone, replaced by someone stronger, someone who understood that her worth wasn't tied to him, and never had been. The hours that followed were a blur. James, defeated, tried to argue to salvage what was left of their life together. But Lillian's resolve didn't waver. She knew what she had to do, and she would not be swayed by his pleas or his empty promises. She filed for divorce the next day. It wasn't a decision she made lightly, but it was the right one. James had taken enough from her, her trust, her heart, and now, her peace of mind. He would take nothing more. The process was swift. Lillian's lawyers made sure she kept every penny she had earned, every ounce of the empire she had built from the ground up. She had worked tirelessly to get to where she was, and she was not going to let a man who had never truly loved her take it away. James would receive nothing. He had nothing left to take. In the days that followed, Lillian's emotions were a whirlwind. At times, she felt a pang of sadness, a brief flicker of longing for the man she had once believed in. But those moments were fleeting. They were soon replaced by a quiet sense of relief, and then an overwhelming sense of freedom. She had released herself from the weight of his lies, from the shackles of his betrayal. She had done it for herself, for her own healing. Lillian had risen from the depths of heartbreak and disappointment, stronger and more determined than ever before. The pain she had endured had not broken her. It had shaped her, forged her into someone who could no longer be taken advantage of. She didn't need James, or anyone, to define her worth. She had everything she needed within herself. And as she stood at the window of her penthouse, looking out at the city below, Lillian knew that her future was still bright. The road ahead would not always be easy, but she was ready for whatever came next. The lesson she had learned was simple but powerful. True strength lies not in relying on others for validation, but in trusting yourself and your own abilities. Lillian had come through the storm, and she had emerged not just unbroken, but stronger than ever. The news of Lillian's divorce spread like wildfire. Headlines praised the woman who had faced betrayal at the hands of the man she loved, only to rise above it with grace, strength, and an unshakable resolve. Lillian's story was not just about heartbreak. It was a narrative of reclaiming one's power, of refusing to be defined by the actions of others. It was the story of a woman who had been knocked down, but had found the strength to rise again, stronger than before. Her transformation from the woman who had once been vulnerable to the woman who stood before the world as a symbol of resilience was nothing short of remarkable. She became a beacon of hope for women everywhere. Women who had been in toxic relationships, who had suffered betrayal, and who had struggled to find their worth after experiencing such pain. Lillian was living proof that survival was possible, and that one could come out the other side not just unbroken, but empowered. Instead of retreating into isolation or giving in to the bitterness that could have consumed her, Lillian poured herself into her work. She channeled her pain into passion, her sorrow into drive. Her business, which had always been a source of pride, flourished even more after her divorce. She expanded into new markets, signed major deals, and became a well-respected figure in the business world. But what set Lillian apart wasn't just her success. It was the heart behind it. She didn't hoard her wealth or bask in the luxury that she had earned. Instead, Lillian turned her success into a force for good. She established initiatives to support women and children in need, particularly those who had experienced domestic abuse or financial hardships. She understood the power of financial independence and the freedom it could bring, and she wanted to help others achieve it. Her foundation provided grants for women entrepreneurs, scholarships for young girls, and resources for mothers struggling to break free from toxic relationships. Lillian didn't just rebuild her life. She used her experience to rebuild others' lives as well. Lillian's resilience was not just reflected in her work, but also in her willingness to share her story. She started accepting speaking engagements, telling her story not as a victim, but as a survivor, an advocate for those who had experienced betrayal, manipulation, and emotional abuse. Her public talks were raw, authentic, and powerful. She didn't shy away from the pain she had endured. Instead, she used it as a springboard to inspire others. Lillian spoke about the dangers of placing one's worth in the hands of another person, how love, when rooted in selfishness and deceit, could erode self-esteem and lead to the loss of one's identity. Her message was clear. You are enough. You don't need anyone to validate your worth. Your strength, your success, your happiness, it comes from within. And even when life knocks you down, you can rise again. The response to her story was overwhelming. Women from all walks of life reached out to Lillian, thanking her for sharing her truth. Some shared their own stories of betrayal and heartbreak. Others simply expressed their gratitude for finding someone who could relate to their pain. In her, they saw hope. In her strength, they saw their own potential. Lillian's message extended beyond the personal realm. She became a voice in the larger societal conversation about relationships, independence, and self-respect. She spoke out against the normalization of toxic behaviors and the tendency to idolize relationships at the expense of one's own well-being. Lillian urged women to prioritize themselves, their dreams, and their happiness, not just to settle for a life defined by someone else's expectations. Her influence was felt far and wide, and soon, Lillian was invited to participate in panel discussions, interviews, and charity events. She became a role model not just for women but for anyone who had experienced betrayal and hardship. Her journey was a testament to the power of resilience and how one's greatest strength can emerge from the ashes of their darkest days. Through it all, Lillian remained humble. She never allowed her success to define her, nor did she let the praise she received go to her head. She knew that true strength wasn't about recognition. It was about perseverance, compassion, and the ability to keep moving forward no matter the obstacles. But perhaps the greatest lesson Lillian taught was not about business or fame. It was about the power of self-love. She showed the world that true healing comes when we stop relying on others for validation and start looking inward to recognize our own worth. It was a lesson many had to learn the hard way, but Lillian made sure to share it openly, with a heart full of generosity and understanding. Her story was one of loss, yes, but it was also one of triumph, not just over adversity, but over the very idea that someone else's betrayal could define her. Lillian's resilience became her greatest asset, a shining example that anyone, no matter how broken they feel, can rebuild their lives, stronger, wiser, and more whole than before. Lillian had shown the world that no matter what happens, we are never truly powerless. The lesson she left behind was simple but profound. Strength is not about how much you endure, but how you rise after the fall. And in that rise, you can become a force for change in your own life and in the lives of others. Through it all, Lillian emerged not just as a survivor, but as a true hero. Someone who had taken her pain and transformed it into power, who had shown the world that even in the face of betrayal, one could rise again, stronger and more determined than ever. Years had passed since the painful divorce and the heartbreak that had threatened to break Lillian. But the woman who stood before the audience now was unrecognizable from the woman she had once been. Lillian was not just a survivor, she was a heroine, an embodiment of resilience, courage, and self-determination. Her life, which had been marred by betrayal, had transformed into a legacy that inspired and empowered countless others. It was a crisp evening, and the grand ballroom was filled with influential leaders, philanthropists, and activists, all gathered for a charity gala to support women's rights and empowerment. As Lillian took the stage, the applause that followed was not just for the accomplishments she had achieved, but for the woman she had become, the kind of woman who used her personal suffering to propel her toward a future of purpose, hope, and change. The room grew silent as Lillian began to speak. Her voice, steady and filled with conviction, reverberated through the crowd. "I stand before you today not as a victim, but as a woman who has reclaimed her power," she began. "I stand before you today because I refuse to let betrayal define me. I refuse to allow someone else's deceit to rob me of my worth. And I hope my story can show you all that no matter how deep the pain, we have the power to rise again." Her words were simple but profound. They resonated with every person in the room, regardless of their background or experience. Lillian wasn't just telling a story of personal triumph. She was offering a roadmap for anyone who had ever felt lost or broken. Her journey was proof that the human spirit could endure, heal, and ultimately transform adversity into something greater. In the years following her divorce, Lillian had poured her heart into her work and philanthropy. The business she had once built for herself, with grit and tenacity, had expanded globally, but it was her charitable endeavors that truly defined her. Her foundation had funded scholarships for women pursuing careers in business, law, and technology. It had provided financial assistance for women seeking to escape abusive relationships and start anew. Lillian's success was no longer measured by profits or titles, but by the lives she had touched and the change she had inspired. Through her foundation, she had also become a powerful advocate for emotional and financial independence. She had worked tirelessly to ensure that women had access to resources and education that would allow them to build their own futures, free from the chains of manipulation or dependency. She had shown the world that financial independence wasn't just a luxury. It was a necessity for personal empowerment and dignity. The truth about James, once a secret that Lillian had kept close to her chest, had been exposed to the world. His affair with Kara had quickly fizzled out, as the superficial nature of his desires was laid bare. Without Lillian's wealth and influence, James had fallen into obscurity. His name was no longer in the papers, no longer a part of the conversation in high society. His lies, once hidden behind a mask of charm and superficiality, were now a public record of his true character. In contrast, Lillian had turned her pain into power, and her name had become synonymous with strength, independence, and compassion. As Lillian scanned the crowd, she saw familiar faces, people she had mentored, women who had come to her for advice, and survivors who had found solace in her story. She could feel the weight of their gratitude and admiration, and it humbled her. She had always believed that she was just one person, but standing there, in front of hundreds, she realized that her story had resonated far beyond her own circle. It had become a source of light for others who were struggling in the darkness. Lillian had not only rebuilt her life, she had reshaped the world around her. Her legacy was not just about the empire she had built, but about the lives she had empowered. She had turned her tragedy into an opportunity to teach others that no one had the right to diminish their worth, no matter the circumstances. She had shown that love was not about possession or validation. It was about mutual respect, trust, and equality. Let your worth be defined by who you are, not by who others think you should be, Lillian said, her voice steady, her words echoing throughout the hall. You are not defined by your mistakes, your pain, or your losses. You are defined by your ability to rise, to rebuild, and to love yourself. Never forget that. The room erupted in applause, and Lillian smiled softly. But it wasn't a smile of pride. It was a smile of peace. She had found the strength within herself to walk away from a life that didn't serve her, to rebuild what was broken, and to create a legacy that would outlive her pain. In the years to come, Lillian's story would be passed down through generations. She would become a role model, a symbol of the unbreakable human spirit, and a woman who had faced one of life's greatest betrayals only to come out the other side as a hero. And in every woman, every man, and every child who found hope in her story, Lillian's legacy would live on. Looking out over the crowd one last time, Lillian realized that in the end, she hadn't just rebuilt her life. She had changed the world. And that, perhaps, was the greatest victory of all. Lillian's journey is a profound lesson in the power of resilience and self-worth. The betrayal she endured was painful, yet it did not define who she was or what she could become. Rather than being consumed by bitterness or revenge, she chose to rise above the pain, focusing on her own growth and healing. This story reminds us that, while we cannot control the actions of others, we do have the power to shape our own responses and futures. True strength is found not in the absence of hardship, but in the way we navigate it. When life tests us, as it often will, the most important thing is to remember who we are, what we stand for, and the value we place on ourselves. Lillian proved that even in the face of betrayal, one's inner strength, integrity, and commitment to self-love are the true markers of success. Her legacy teaches us that no matter the obstacles, we can rise again. Our worth isn't dependent on the approval or actions of others, but on our own belief in ourselves. By embracing resilience, staying true to our values, and loving ourselves unconditionally, we can not only overcome the challenges life throws at us, but emerge stronger, wiser, and ready to inspire others. Lillian's story is a beacon of hope for anyone struggling with betrayal or heartbreak. It reminds us that the power to heal, rebuild, and transform is always within our reach. And in doing so, we become heroes in our own right.